Warning. The following show is intended strictly for entertainment purposes. While Kyle is an actual therapist, the diagnoses within apply to fictional characters only. Don't self-diagnose on the internet, kids. We aren't WebMD.
Hey everybody, welcome to Geek, Deconstructed, where we take a look at some of your favorite characters from pop culture and give them real-world mental health diagnosis. My name is Kyle, I'm a mental health therapist in the state of Ohio, and today we're going to be taking a look at the world's favorite billionaire, playboy, philanthropist, Iron Man. I thought it was going to be really easy to pin down Tony's diagnosis. However, it was actually much more difficult than I originally expected. The first thing that came to mind was narcissistic personality disorder. However, Tony really only meets one criteria, and that is a sense of grandiosity. Other criteria include things like belief that he's special and unique and can only be understood by certain people, which doesn't necessarily happen, a lack of empathy, which we see the opposite of, a grandiose sense of self-importance, such as exaggerating his own achievements. But while he does kind of have that sense of self-importance, he's not necessarily exaggerating his achievements. He's actually pretty much right on par. Preoccupied with fantasies of unlimited success or power, brilliance. Again, he's not really preoccupied by it, but it's part of his life. So really, narcissistic personality disorder doesn't fit with Tony. The other thing that came to mind was an alcohol use disorder. Now, alcohol use disorder is defined as a problematic pattern of alcohol use leading to clinically significant impairment or distress, as manifested by at least 2 criteria in a 12-month period. Now, looking over these criteria, Tony does, drink occasionally in the movies, and there's actually an entire comic story arc where he fights with alcoholism. However, because of the kind of time frame we're dealing with in the movies, it's hard to pin down whether or not any 2 criteria are met together within a 12-month period. So alcohol use disorder is something to possibly consider, but it's not necessarily anything I'm comfortable giving him right now. So with narcissism out, despite the fact he's a little narcissistic personality disorder is out. And despite the alcohol use disorder is also out. So what are we looking at for Tony Stark? And to figure that out, I'm going to take a look at Tony Stark at the end of Avengers and into Iron Man 3. And the thing that came to mind with that was post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, post-traumatic stress disorder is defined as exposure to actual or threatened death, serious injury, or sexual violence in one or more of the following ways. Now, Tony is actually going to meet the first criteria, which is directly experiencing the traumatic event. This traumatic event is during the final fight of the Avengers when he takes a nuke through to space and almost dies in the process. He's experiencing a traumatic near-death experience, and because of that, he's going to suffer from a lot of new symptoms. Now, criteria B for post-traumatic stress disorder is prevalence of at least one of the following intrusive symptoms associated with the traumatic event, beginning after the traumatic event occurred. Now, Tony's going to meet criteria 5 in this category, which is marked physiological reactions to internal or external cues that symbolize or resemble an aspect of the traumatic event. So essentially what this means is that when thinking about the event or when encountering something that is part of the event or remembering of the event, the person is going to have a physical reaction to it. And in this case, in Iron Man 3, which is the first movie we see Iron Man in after the Avengers, we notice that Tony has a lot of panic attacks. Now these occur, when the thoughts of the event happen or, when he's having trouble sleeping because of the event. These panic attacks really set in and make it hard for him to continue on with his life. It's very intrusive for him. Now, section C is persistent avoidance of stimuli associated with the traumatic event beginning after the event occurs, by evidence of at least one of the 2 criteria. Now, Tony's going to meet the first criteria, which is avoidance of or efforts to avoid distressing memories, thoughts, or feelings that are about or closely related to the traumatic event. Now, in this case, we do see Tony spending a lot of his time trying to focus elsewhere. He's building a lot of Iron Man suits. He's doing everything he can to avoid thinking about the event of the Avengers. So really, he's just doing everything in his power to avoid thinking about that one particular traumatic event. Section D is negative alterations or cognitions and mood associated with the traumatic event, beginning or worsening after the traumatic event occurred, as evidenced by at least 2 criteria. Now in this case, he's going to meet criteria 2 of this section, which is persistent and exaggerated negative beliefs or expectations about oneself, others, or the world. At this point, Tony has trouble trusting other people. He has trouble trusting himself at times, and he definitely has a more negative worldview because of the events of the Avengers. He is unable to really cope with the events and the near-death experience, and therefore he really has a negative view about himself and the world. He's also going to meet criteria 4 in this section, which is persistent negative emotional state, such as fear, horror, anger, guilt, or shame. We see a lot of fear in Iron Man 3. We see a lot of horror in a lot of cases. The panic attacks really, there's evidence of that because he's unable to cope with what happened when he almost died. Section E is marked alterations in arousal and reactivity associated with traumatic events beginning or worsening after the traumatic event occurs. Now in this case, he only needs to meet 2 criteria, but he's actually going to meet 4. The first one he's going to meet is criteria 2, reckless or self-destructive behavior. As Iron Man he's spending days upon days building these new suits, he is staying awake, not sleeping. He's putting himself and even Pepper Potts in danger, as at one point one of the Iron Man suits becomes animated and tries to kill Pepper as they sleep. He's endangering not only his own life, but others as well. He's also going to meet criteria 3, which is hypervigilance. Again, because he's building all these suits for an emergency situation, you can really see that hypervigilance. He's very focused on making sure something like this doesn't happen again. We're also going to see criteria 5, which is problems with concentration. In Iron Man 3, we see, again, he's focusing so much on making sure this stuff doesn't happen again that he has difficulty concentrating. At one point, concentration is the only thing that stops a panic attack when he encounters a young boy who tells him to build something to calm himself down. And finally, he's going to meet criteria 6, which is sleep disturbance. Again, he doesn't sleep for days at a time, and when he does sleep, he's haunted by nightmares, he's forced awake, and he gets very little sleep in the process. Criteria F is that the duration of the disturbance is at least 1 month. We see that it is at least 1 month because the event in the Avengers happened 6 months before the events of Iron Man 3. Criteria G says the disturbance causes clinically significant distress or impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning. In this case, again, Tony is unable to fulfill social roles, occupational roles, because he is so focused on keeping himself and other people safe. And finally, criteria H is that the disturbance is not attributable to the physiological effects of some kind of a substance. Now, while Tony does drink quite a bit during the events of Iron Man 3 and really all of the movies, none of them are, that's not frequent enough for this to be attributable to the alcohol use itself. Alright guys, so that's it for Tony. I was initially assuming narcissistic personality disorder and alcohol use disorder, but when you really look at the criteria, they don't necessarily fit. So we're going to take a look at post-traumatic stress disorder, especially following the events of the Avengers and into Iron Man 3. And again guys, thank you so much for watching. Make sure you leave a comment below. Tell me who you want to see diagnosed next. Make sure if you enjoyed the video, leave a like, share, subscribe, and we will see you next week. Thanks. Bye. Billionaire. Start that again.
It's a billion.
Billion. Guess how much money, you guys? Try that shit again. Billionaire. Playboy philanthropist.
Yeah, it's Civil War.
Yeah.
It's a movie.
It's a movie.
We're doing movie Iron Man.
Also books. Where the fuck is post-traumatic stress disorder? Alright, so that's what... Damn it, why did I... Damn it. Especially after the events of the Avengers. God.
Fun fact, we don't care about the comments. We already did the videos.
Yeah, we did.